to Hannan first. There's lots of different figures flying around about how many refugees Britain will take. Say it was something like 15,000, though. Would that be enough, in your view?
Well, it's a gesture. I don't think anyone's suggesting that it's a solution. You just heard the figures there, nearly 2 million in Turkey, 1.2 million in Lebanon. So 10 or 15,000 is not going to make any significant difference. It's more an example of people wanting to do something, people demonstrating their sense of empathy and compassion, and that's a very good thing in itself, but it's separate from the question of how we stabilise Syria and how we treat this problem at source.
Well, I'll come on to that in a minute, but why not then just put no upper limit on the numbers, as the Munich mayor seems to be doing?
Well, we haven't been putting an upper limit on the numbers. What we're talking about is going into the camps, in the UN camps in the frontline states, in Lebanon particularly, and taking people out of there. It's not that we have had a surge of Syrians trying to get in to the UK. And I think it's quite important to maintain the distinction between taking people from those camps who are unquestionably in dire need. I was working as a volunteer in one of those camps on the border last year. I think that's a really, there's no question there that people are in fear of their lives. Taking those people rather than those who have already made the journey to the EU. If you're in Italy or Greece or Hungary or Germany, you are not in immediate danger. You're not facing a well-founded fear of persecution. And if we take people from elsewhere in the EU, we are rewarding the people traffickers and we're encouraging more people to take that hellish journey.
OK. Humza Yousaf, do you agree with that you're rewarding the people traffickers by taking people from the EU rather than the camps?
No, I wouldn't agree. I think a UK solution has to, of course, take those people from refugee camps on nearby Syria, but I think also we have an obligation, a moral obligation actually, to take from those frontline states in Europe. It wouldn't be rewarding it for a couple of reasons. One is, I would suggest that the UK government and Conservatives look at this through a prism of empathy as opposed to suspicion. Those people who make that perilous journey do so because they're mothers and fathers that are risking their children's life, not for a food bank voucher or £35 a week. It's because they're fleeing conflict, persecution, sexual violence, and so on and so forth. So they're making that journey, but it's clear that Italy, Greece and Hungary cannot cope. We have an EU resettlement and relocation programme. The UK has decided to opt out. I would urge the UK government to opt in and be part of that common solution to a very inhumane situation right on our doorstep.
Well, Daniel Hannan, should the government be showing more empathy? I mean, was it right, for example, that there's been this emotional outpouring in response to that horribly tragic picture of the toddler washed up on the beach?
Sure. I mean, everyone, every parent, in fact, every sentient adult is going to react in the same way seeing those images. But I'm not sure that Humza is right about this. I actually was just last week in a hostel for young migrants, and the economic refugees are jumbled up. The economic migrants are jumbled up with the refugees. I was in the south of Italy. There were lads there from Ghana, from Gambia, from Senegal, and they were doing what I hope I would be brave enough to do in their position. They'd had hellish journeys, but they were not, in any legal sense, asylum seekers. And if you say that we're going to open the door to anyone who has made the journey, then effectively you're saying that instead of taking those in the most need, instead of taking those who have been adjudged to be refugees by the United Nations, or indeed instead of taking those who have queued up properly and kept to the rules and filled in the application in the appropriate way, you are contracting out our immigration policy to the people smugglers. And I fail to see how that is a moral, let alone an effective or practical policy.
Humza Yousaf?
It's an incredible statement to think that those that have made the perilous journey over here are only doing so because of economic reasons. You mentioned the Gambia. Anybody who has an ounce of knowledge about external affairs would know that the situation in Gambia in terms of human rights is pretty perilous. But to think because people haven't, I'll tell you what, when the Syrian forces come to your door to rape your mother or the Daesh forces come to bomb your house, the fact that you haven't formed a nice orderly queue outside an embassy in order to make a proper application means that you shouldn't be allowed asylum, I think is a frankly ludicrous notion. I would suggest once again that Daniel and his colleagues in the UK government in particular look at
no
this
one is arguing
through
that.
A prism
you
of
obviously weren't
empathy
listening to a word I said.
and
No one
not
argued
through a
that.
prism of suspicion.
Well, let me just ask you, we're almost out of time actually, but Daniel Hannan, the case being made for airstrikes now, you were sceptical 2 years ago. Are you still sceptical now?
I was sceptical 2 years ago. I think things have changed, not only because of the refugee crisis, but because of the rise of Islamic State. we've seen British subjects kidnapped and murdered solely because they hold British passports. That, under almost any definition, is an act of war. I think that things have moved on, but I don't think anyone is proposing an invasion of Syria. That's exactly what Daesh is trying to encourage us into doing. I think there is a case for establishing safe havens and a no-fly zone.
I'm afraid we're completely
keen to support
I'm afraid we're
if there were a
completely out
proposal
of time.
to
I'm
do that.
sorry to interrupt, but Daniel Hannan, Humza Yousaf, thank you very much for joining me.